The Barbarian War, Chapters 37 and 38, Embers of Resolve. Chapter 37. So tell me, just how fragile is this alliance? Leandra Singh challenged the two commanders. If it comes to a showdown between the Tetrarchy and Chugaz Uidan, will you both stand with us? Or will you be too busy tearing each other to pieces? Admiral Fujimoto and Dyaksh Jiaj Guyaz eyed each other warily, something that did not go unnoticed by the Prime Minister, nor did the room full of heavily armed humans and Konhim behind them. That's an excellent question, Prime Minister, Helene mused. You know where I stand, of course. I do, Admiral, but you know what they say about a bird in the hand. Leandra steepled her fingers as she marshaled her thoughts. Chugaz Uidan's forces are the greater threat, but the ships under Jiaj's command are the very same ones that shattered your fleet. Are you certain you're not thinking about getting a little payback? Perhaps when his attention is elsewhere? Jiaj raised an appraising eyebrow as the Admiral stiffened in her seat. Prime Minister, I can assure you I understand my priorities. Whatever personal feelings I may have on the subject, my duty is to protect the Tetrarchy at all costs. She turned and faced the Konhim warrior once more. After the battle, however, we shall see. The Prime Minister's professional face was firmly clamped down as she took that in, before turning to Jiaj. And you, Dyaksh. Unless we destroy Chugaz Uidan's forces, my life and the lives of those sworn to my banner are forfeit. I have as much an interest in seeing him defeated as you do. His face was carefully neutral as regarded Helene once more. But the Admiral raises an interesting point in her less than subtle way. Assuming we are victorious, what happens then? Ideally, we sit down across the negotiating table and try to come to some sort of an agreement. Hopefully something a bit more formal than, you don't bother us, and we won't bother you. She sighed as she leaned back in her chair. You've seen how well that worked out. I won't expose the Tetrarchy to that sort of folly again. This time, either we come to an arrangement that satisfies both sides or... Ah, Jiaj murmured with an enigmatic smile. Or else the situation suddenly becomes interesting. Indeed, Leandra said flatly. I would very much like to avoid that possibility, Dyaksh. That being said, the safety and security of those I have sworn to protect is my only priority. If we cannot find a peaceful solution to our dilemma, then I will order our forces to prosecute this war to its ultimate conclusion. Don't think for a moment that I won't. I believe you, Prime Minister, Jiaj replied. But let us leave aside for the moment the question of whether or not you can. He raised his hand in a placating gesture as Helene angrily pushed back her chair. As I said, a question for another time. At the moment, we have a battle to plan. Yes, we do, the Prime Minister replied after a moment. And you still maintain that Chugaz Uidan is heading for the Chenor cluster? That is correct, Jiaj agreed. Or perhaps it is better to say we have been unable to come up with a more likely target. Leandra nodded and then turned to Helene. And you, Admiral? Do you concur? She gave the Konhim commander a piercing stare before answering. After reviewing the data provided, I find myself in tentative agreement with that conclusion. Given what we know of Chugaz Uidan and his motives as well as the current situation, it seems to be his most probable course of action. I just can't shake the feeling we're being set up, Leandra grimaced. But anything else would only be a guess. She took a deep breath and gave them a curt nod. Very well, we will proceed on that assumption. None of the principals appeared especially happy with that decision, but unfortunately none of them had anything better to offer. They quickly sketched out a rough battle plan, but given the number of unknowns, anything more specific was doomed to failure. Even if everything broke their way, there would still be a great deal of adapting on the fly in order to make it work. As the meeting prepared to break up, Leandra's features softened. She looked to each of the commanders in turn and asked quietly, "How's he taking it?" Admiral Fujimoto bowed her head, as well as can be expected. Jiaj slowly nodded. In the space of 2 days, he has lost the two people most important to him. I fear the news may have dealt him a mortal blow. Leandra frowned unhappily. I couldn't help but notice his absence. Where's he now? In his quarters, Helene replied. He has asked to be left undisturbed. Alone? She asked sharply. Are you sure that's wise? We're keeping an eye on him. Discreetly, the Admiral said quickly. We'll do our best to prevent him from doing anything rash. Thank you for that, Leandra said softly. I doubt our last conversation helped the situation any. I believe that is the last thing on his mind, Prime Minister, Giage told her. We have spoken only a handful of words since he received the news, but I suspect he blames himself for both their deaths. At the moment, that is weighing far heavier on his mind. Leandra sighed heavily. He never wanted this, any of it, she said glumly. I dragooned him and Raykret both into service because I needed them, and given the same circumstances, I'd do it again. She sighed once again and shook her head. But that doesn't mean I don't regret the necessity, or the cost. She stared out at them from her office. Look after him, will you? I will, Helene and Giage said simultaneously, before looking at one another in surprise. Nasat knelt in the center of his quarters, his head bent in prayer, dressed in the robes he once wore as an acolyte. The familiar sensation of cloth often helped him to meditate, in those times when serenity refused to come. A single candle flickered before him as he struggled to find some sense of peace, some quiet atoll of tranquility he could cling to in his darkest moments. But no matter how hard he tried, the stillness he so desperately searched for could not be found. For hours he had knelt there, refusing both food and drink, as he sought the answers to the questions that tore at his soul. Why? Hadn't he given enough? Hadn't he done all that had been asked of him, and more? Why did Raykret have to die? The silence of the universe mocked him, refusing to answer. Had the Creator turned his back on him? Was her death punishment for some transgression? He wanted to scream, to rend his robes in anguish, to smash and crush and burn, but in the end, he simply wept silent tears. It's not your fault, you know. Nasat's head whipped up in shock, searching the room for the source of that voice. His eyes widened when he saw the human female Tango perched on a chair, watching him with placid eyes. He had not heard the door open or her enter his quarters. It was almost as if she had simply materialized out of thin air. "What are you doing here?" he said brusquely. "I left instructions not to be disturbed." "Being alone is the last thing you need," she replied, "and wallowing in self-pity won't bring either of them back." "Get out!" he snapped. Only his words seemed to have no effect on her. "The first time I met you on Uzonks, I didn't think you'd last a week, let alone the war," she reminisced with a wry smile. "But you surprised me, and that doesn't happen very often." Tango leaned back in her chair and crossed her legs. "There is more to you, Nasat, than meets the eye." Nasat rose to his feet, his stiff limbs crying out in protest as he faced her. "Why are you here?" he demanded once again. "I do not need someone to hold my hand." "I could say I'm here because someone has to be," she replied after a moment's thought. "Or perhaps I could say that it's in my best interest to ensure my commander doesn't suffer a meltdown." Her normally hard-edged expression was nowhere to be found, making her seem years younger. Or maybe it's because I've been there myself. He stared at her in confusion. "In all the years I have known you, you have barely spoken 2 sentences to me in the same sitting," he managed to get out. "So why do you open up to me now?" "Because of what's coming," she said quietly. "When we face Chugaz Uidan in battle, we'll need you at your best. And right now you're no good to any of us." The familiar stern visage was back now as she rose to her feet. "Time to cowboy the fuck up," she said gruffly, heading for the door. "Once more unto the breach, Nasat. Once more." And then she left, without another word. Chapter 38. "Just how solid is this intel?" Admiral Matavosian asked. "I don't know," Leandra replied unhappily. "I'd be forced to call it a best guess." "A guess," Matavosian repeated, deadpan. "That's not very encouraging." "I know, but it's all we have. Nasat and Fujimoto both stand by the information, as does Giage Guyaz." The Admiral shook his head. "And how do we know that this isn't some disinformation campaign cooked up by the once and future Diaksh? Sure, he claims he and Chugaz Uidan are mortal enemies, but can we trust that? Or him?" "You're not asking any questions I haven't already asked myself," Leandra told him. "I want to believe them. Truly I do. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't have misgivings." She sighed and stared bleakly at him. "Only at the end of the day, it's all we have." Matavosian grimaced. "Right. Do we know when to expect the attack? Leandra shrugged. Soon. That's the best I can give you. The Admiral just stared at her. You're risking everything on maybe and soon? Should I consult a Ouija board while I'm at it? Read some chicken entrails? What about I Ching? I hear that's popular, he said with thinly veiled sarcasm. Enough! Leandra glared at the image on the screen. What part of it's all we have did you not understand? It's either this or do nothing, and I am not doing nothing. Do I make myself clear? Yes, ma'am, he answered stiffly, suitably abashed. Leandra let him stew in his own juices for a moment before moving on. Now then, what's your status? We've scraped together what we can, as per your instructions, he replied. It wasn't as much as we'd hoped. Between engineering issues and problems with qualified personnel, we've managed to ready 75% to 80% of what we'd originally projected. He sighed wearily. I'm sorry there isn't more. We've been working around the clock, and those numbers aren't going to get any better. We always knew that projection was optimistic, Leandra answered stoically despite her misgivings. How soon can you get here? 3 to 5 days, barring unforeseen circumstances, he answered immediately. Some of these ships are flying on a wing and a prayer. We can't afford any delays, she informed him. If they can't keep up, they get left behind. Understood, he said quietly. Prime Minister, given the data from Admiral Fujimoto and what I'm bringing in, I feel it's my duty to inform you that what we have— Ma'am, it's not enough, he said desperately. We'll give them one hell of a fight, but— I know, she said quietly. And to make matters worse, Helene's forces are trailing behind Chuga's Uidans, which means it's up to us to stop them until they can catch up. Matavosian stared blankly at her. Then that's it then. That's the ball game. He closed his eyes as a pained expression suddenly seemed to age him. I might as well just shoot them myself. Prime Minister, what you're describing is a suicide mission. It's Task Force Odysseus all over again. I'm afraid that could be a very real possibility, Leandra said grimly, but things aren't quite as bleak as they seem. We've been digging through everything we have on this end, and we might just have another string to our bow. The Admiral perked straight up. I'm all ears. The Prime Minister managed an austere smile. Then consider this your official read into Operation Lacuna. Helene sat in her stateroom, staring at a projection of the local starfield as she nursed her drink. Despite her years of naval service, real service, not the virtual reality gaming that had given her her fame, this war was taking a far greater toll on her than the previous one had. It wasn't just the losses they'd suffered, but something more. She glanced down at the empty sleeve of her uniform, and then at the picture of her father, its frame draped with a black ribbon, and wondered just how much she had left to give. The door chimed softly, pulling her from her reveries. Enter, she said quietly. The hatch slid open as Nasat stood in the doorway. I hope I am not intruding, he said in hesitant tones. The Admiral looked up in surprise. Not at all, she said, rising to her feet, only to have Nasat wave her back to her chair. Please do not get up on my account, he told her, as she gratefully collapsed back into her chair. You should be in sickbay. Sickbay is for serious cases only, she said evenly. And besides, there's nothing more they can do for me in the here and now. After this is over, I'll let the healers work their magic, but at the moment I can't spare the downtime. Nasat eyed her glass, and without a word went to her sidebar and poured a drink of his own. Helene raised an eyebrow at that, but said nothing, as he found a spot across from her and sat down as well. To what do I owe the honor? She asked curiously. Honestly, I do not know, he replied after a moment's thought. Something just compelled me to seek you out. I understand, she said quietly, as the edge of her lip curled up slightly. It may surprise you to learn this, but we humans have a herd instinct as well. He stared at her in surprise. I find that difficult to believe. You have always prided yourselves on your individuality. The smile grew wider. It's true. Oh, not to the extent your species does, but it's there. We're social creatures, always have been. Nasat took a cautious sip of his drink, before looking back up at her. The uncharitable might describe your social instinct as social predation, he said without rancor. You are pack hunters, after all. That is also true, Helene admitted. We're a complicated species, filled with internal contradictions, and we're not much closer to understanding ourselves now than when we started. She took a long drink of her own, before leaning forward. Nasat, why are you really here? Nasat closed his eyes. I could no longer justify hiding in my quarters while the rest of the fleet prepares for the upcoming battle. I came to inform you that I am ready to resume my duties. Are you? She asked point blank. I'm not so sure. Would it matter if I was not? He shot back. I may lack your skills in naval combat, but I can still read a tactical projection. He took another sip and stared down at his feet. The odds of any of us returning home are slight. He lifted his head and looked her in the eyes. Tell me I am wrong. She wanted to look away, but honesty compelled her to meet his gaze. No, you're not wrong, she said quietly. Unless we can coordinate our attack with Admiral Matavosian's forces, which means sacrificing at least half a dozen worlds, Chugazuidan will pick us off one at a time. So I surmised, he said with a heavy heart. Then if I am fated to fall, I would like my death to mean something. Helene sighed and drained the last of her drink before setting the glass down. We humans have a saying, the man who is convinced he's going to die will usually find a way to make it happen. She shook her head sadly. Your death won't bring her back, and if you think it's something you deserve, I'd say you've suffered enough. Compared to whom? He asked frankly, before gazing pointedly at her missing arm. Not all scars are on the outside, Nasat, she said softly. The Sortuar shrugged her objections aside. I have been going over your deployment plans, and while they seem more than adequate, I have a small addition of my own. Nasat withdrew a small tablet from his tunic, pulling up a file before wordlessly handing it over. The Admiral took the proffered device and balanced it awkwardly on her knees as she perused the data, before giving out a low whistle. It certainly isn't lacking in the audacity department, she said as she went through the file, before looking back up. It's risky, to say the least. Nasat snorted. Tell me one thing we've done in the last 10 years that wasn't. Helene actually found herself chuckling at that, before handing the tablet back over. You're sure about this? She said evenly. I am, Nasat nodded. With any luck, it may just give us a fighting chance. And of course you intend to be a part of it, she continued. Yes, he replied. Will that be a problem? She leaned forward, searching his eyes before giving him a nonchalant shrug. Last time I checked, you still outranked me, she said at last. If you're determined to lead this mission, I can't stop you. Nasat nodded and rose to his feet. Then I will begin preparations, he said unflinchingly as he turned to leave, pausing as he reached the door. Thank you, he said softly, before disappearing from sight. Helene watched the door slide shut and bowed her head. Banzai, she whispered.